Hello and welcome to Genie for Tots. It's great to have you on this webinar with us today, and we are delighted to see that, like us, you're very keen to give your child that undeniable edge in life that comes from knowing a new language. Hi, I'm Vishal Sharma, co-founder of Genie for Tots, and my goal today is to discuss what we as parents desire most for our kids, and then show you how just one very simple act, namely that of learning a new language, can actually have a remarkable impact in 13 key areas of children's development and easily accomplish many of our cherished goals for our kids. And what I'd like to do is also shed some light on what the best time is to learn a second language, some tips and tricks and time-tested advice to make language learning easy, and then focus a little bit on key features that we believe programs should have for teaching our children a new language. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about a unique online Hindi immersion program for kids and give you a few core elements of the program and how in just 13 minutes a day or less, you can give your child the gift of a second language and all its attendant benefits. So what is it that all of us really want for our kids as parents? And if you think about it, don't we all want that they have enhanced intellectual capacity, that they're doing better in school, scholastically, academically, that they always end up with a well-developed, strong personality, and then have a fantastic career potential, and along the way pick up valuable life skills that are going to stand them in good stead no matter where they are in life. And that's absolutely what we want. The reason is that in today's global society, distances are shrinking and greater cross-cultural communication is absolutely the need of the hour. And multiculturalism is increasing. And what we'd like is that our kids have every edge that they can get. And what better way to do that than to develop that one skill that impacts no less than 13 critical areas of development. And an easy way to achieve all of these goals is, of course, to learn a new language. Now, before I move on, I think it's good for us to look at some of the myths along the way about learning new languages. And here's one that really gives me a kick. So only bilingual parents can raise bilingual kids, and bilingual parents always raise bilingual children. And that's clearly not true, because think about it. If that was the case, right here in the US, we should by now, over decades of immigration, have had hundreds of thousands of people speaking Italian, Russian, Chinese, Hindi, Urdu, German, and many, many other languages. In fact, if parents aren't conscious and careful, by the second generation itself, and certainly by the third generation and beyond, only 5% or less of the bilingual traits remain. So that's pretty clear that it's not just bilingual parents that can raise bilingual kids. As I'll talk about later, with the right tricks and the right foundation and knowledge, any parent, as long as they are somewhat determined, can raise a child who knows more than one language, even if the parent is monolingual. And of course, that's a great opportunity for the parents also to learn that language, by the way. There are today hundreds of ways for children to learn a second language, and way too many resources available to help us do that. As we'll talk later, our program at Genie for Tots is one such resource, which is designed to incorporate many of the elements that are key to language learning, while also inculcating a love of learning more generally in kids, which is a very highly prized skill, and it's common to some of the most successful people on the planet. And if you look up the Forbes 400 list, you will find almost uniformly that the top most successful people in that list have always stated that the love of learning that they developed very early on in their careers or their childhood has been instrumental in their success. So let's take a look at what some of the research studies have actually shown us. And here's two very interesting things to look at. So one is a College Board study in 2004 that actually showed that students who had at least 4 years of a language course were able to score over 100 points more on each section of the SAT test than their counterparts. And then there's a 1998 study by the US Department of Education that also showed that SAT scores in all subjects are directly affected by a foreign language study. In fact, if you look at the table here, you'll see that on average, students that were doing a foreign language study course and were multilingual speakers had between 70 points and 150 points average higher scores than students who were monolingual and didn't have that benefit. So then the question arises, is being bilingual just geared at enhanced scholastic development? And is that all there is to it? And the answer, of course, is no, not at all. As I'll show you in a minute, there are about 13 key benefits in 13 key development areas that are actually directly impacted by the study of a foreign language or study of another language. We'll see that the study of languages impacts not only intelligence and cognition, but also personality and social skills and scholarship and even career and a lot of different success factors later on in life. Perhaps the most significant finding that has emerged from the research studies of the past is that language learning actually enhances intelligence. And there were significant gains in IQ seen in students that had multi-language study versus those that did not. And a number of studies have shown that not only that, there's also a tremendous increase in mental flexibility, and students with multi-language skills have a superior understanding conceptually, not just of language, but of all academic subjects in general. In fact, between 1960 and 1990, almost 12 dozen studies were conducted on the relationship between second language learning and early development, and almost all of them, without exception, found that mental flexibility and a superior conceptual understanding are invariably the benefits that any youngster experiences when they deal with two language systems. The same studies also showed that there was a remarkable advancement in what's called cognitive development as well. Cognitive development is a combination of things like perception, memory, judgment, and reasoning. For example, a number of the studies indicated that those individuals that had second language study had sharper memories simply because they had to get used to recalling multiple symbols and multiple sounds. And they also had greater mental flexibility, meaning that they had better problem solving skills, they were able to think more logically, and they were able to synthesize complex information. And pretty much all of this happens because their brains have to learn to distinguish two or more different systems of sound, symbols, and meanings. Of course, it's also been said that language is a window to the culture, to any culture that you're learning the language of. And that's why children who know a second language, it turns out, have, as we might expect, a much greater global understanding of cultures, a much greater cross-cultural understanding, and they have a sense of what's called cultural pluralism, by which we mean that they have an openness to and an appreciation of several other cultures. And because of the fact that they have to be able to understand what kind of listener they are dealing with when they are multilingual, they are also much better at anticipating the needs of listeners and much better in their communication skills. And that's not all. Language learning also has a tremendous advantages for personal development and personality. For example, it boosts self-confidence because, as you might imagine, when you master a new language, there's some accomplishment, sense of accomplishment that comes with it, and that boosts self-confidence. And then there's of course an increased self-esteem because children feel good having accomplished the goal of gaining a new competency. And it's always a kick for them if they can know something about a language that they can then tell their parents who might not know quite so much. It turns out that second language learning has also been shown to instill a whole plethora of lifelong skills among language learners, which include, among other things, the ability to solve complex problems, as I told you earlier, a very heightened sense of creativity, and the ability to indeed look at life itself with a completely different perspective. As we've already talked about, there are tremendous benefits for just academic and scholastic achievement that we've looked at already. We've already seen that there's an improvement in all the standardized test scores, and that has been shown through numerous studies across state tests and across national tests. But the interesting fact is that when you start learning a second language, you end up improving your vocabulary, comprehension, and basic language skills, even in the first language, in the main language, which may actually be English. And in addition, bilingual students, as we've seen, already routinely score higher in all other subjects like reading, English, math, social studies, and science, in addition to language. Bilingualism today provides a tremendous education and career advantage. As you might imagine, just because of the global developments, because of which there's an increased demand for bilingual professionals, you can have business opportunities, internship opportunities, employment opportunities, all across the globe if you can speak multi-languages. Studies have even shown that there is a salary benefit of anywhere from 5 to 20% for somebody who's bilingual or multilingual as opposed to being monolingual. So what that tells us is that bilingualism is definitely a highly desirable asset. And in the increasingly globalized world that we live in today, our children are going to need that second language skill much earlier and possibly at a much higher level of competence than we could have imagined maybe even 10, 15 years ago. And of course, what that does is it underscores the importance of giving our children this educational and career advantage as soon as we possibly can. So, all right, that kind of sounds good. But when should one start learning a new language? What's the appropriate time to do that? The answer, it turns out, is very simple. The earlier, the better. If you look at the research studies across the decades, they're roughly dividing language learning capabilities into three periods. So the first period actually begins right at birth and goes to about 3 years of age. And I'll tell you in a moment why that's so good. The second period goes roughly from about 2 years of age to 7 years of age. And then we have the third period, which lies between 10 and 13 years. And the reason is that before the age of 12, the brain of a young child is indeed racing to wire itself, making more and more connection between the nerve cells. And it's this increasing number of connections that provide that added edge to a child to learn not even one or two, maybe even three or four languages, because you have all these neural connections that are happening, and they are just optimally suited to help you learn another language. Let's just try and understand why the researchers have claimed that that's the case. So here, Dr. George Bush, who's associate professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, a specialist in brain mapping, observes that when the brain of a child is exposed to the sounds of a second language, the brain actually grows new connections, and that makes language learning easy. And the interesting part is that this capability and the growth in the neurons, which is called neurogenesis, begins to go down after the age of 12. So therefore, before that is really the optimal time to focus on second language learning. Does that mean that we really cannot learn a language as an adult? Well, clearly not. It turns out that children and adults learn languages in somewhat different ways. When you learn a language as a child, you pack it into what's called the Wernicke's area, where there's no compartmentalization between different languages and different language systems that you learned. All of that is stored in the same area of the brain, which is an advantage because you can correlate across those things better. When you start learning languages as an adult, you store them in what's called the Broca's area of the brain, where there are small compartments created for each language or language system that you become familiar with. And then these compartments have therefore to communicate with each other when you need to correlate across languages. So what makes kids so good at language learning is that single location in the brain in which they store their information. And that's what Dr. Joy Hirsch of neuroscience at Cornell University Medical College also observes. So now that we understand a little bit about what the benefits are of learning languages early and what the phases are, a natural question that may come up is, well, are there any tips or tricks, or do you have any advice for parents so they can make second language learning easy? And before I actually go on to that, I'm going to bust another one of these language learning myths for you, and that goes as follows. So there is sometimes a thought in our minds that only native language speakers or native language teachers can teach children second languages. This one's a myth for two reasons. First, if you actually analyze the speech of adult native language speakers, that speech is full of imperfections. And yet any child that's exposed to their parents speaking a native language happens to pick that language up pretty naturally and almost flawlessly. So what that tells us is that the language learning capability of kids is actually not impacted so much by imperfections in the language that they hear. What's more important is that they actually hear something. And the exact same logic holds true for your second or third language. As long as you're hearing some interactions in that language as a child, it really doesn't matter how perfect they are. The value, therefore, is in the interaction. And the goal for any language education, whether it's done by a parent or in a more formal environment, really ought to be in focusing on a very rich, dynamic, and meaningful interaction with speakers of the language. And that, it turns out, as I told you earlier, given all the resources at our disposal today, is actually achievable in many different ways. And we're going to come back to this question a little bit later in our discussion as well. So let's start looking at some of the key characteristics that we've distilled for you across a lot of different research and different books on the subject. And here I think are some of the keys. So the first thing is, and this probably is no surprise to you at this point, is to start early and give meaningful exposure to the child. Now, what does it mean to give meaningful exposure? What it means is that you try to integrate that second language in whatever small way possible into your everyday routine in life. So you could do the daily things that you do, have your little interactions, and pick up a few phrases or a few words here and there, and make it sort of a point or a practice to use that in interactions with your child, even if they're a very young child. And the interesting part is you don't need to be bilingual, you don't even need to be a native speaker of the language, and you certainly don't need to be perfect. But what you do have to do is to start early. The second thing is that children really benefit from live human interaction and imitation. There have been studies, for example, that have shown what happens when you sit little kids, maybe under the age of 3 years old, in front of a TV or a video program being done in a second language. And the discovery was that even a substantial exposure to this kind of television programming did absolutely nothing to inculcate second language skills in the child. Whereas even a little bit of live human interaction, even if that was imperfect, went a very long way in helping the child later on develop second language learning skills. And the easiest way that is recommended to do that is to integrate language into an everyday routine in kind of a fun and meaningful way. An example of that might be, let's say you have a 1.5 year old, you're taking them in your lap and you're climbing stairs in your house. Well, instead of counting it in English, maybe you want to teach them Spanish and you have learned unos, dos, tres, and you count the stairs as you hop up them in Spanish. Or there was a lady who wanted to teach her daughter French, and the routine she developed was that while she was changing her diaper, she would just say out a little poem or a ditty in French. And before you knew it, the little girl, when she was 18 months old, was talking to her dolls in French. So as you can see, it's just the activities that matter. You could even sing and dance with your kids, even if you're not the greatest singer on the planet, in an off-key voice, as long as it's in the second language. And you'd be amazed at just how much of that language, imperfect as it is, coming through somebody who may not be perfect in the language, actually has a big impact on the child's capability to learn the language. And the other important part that has been repeatedly recommended is that we try to make print media a part of our bilingual parenting plan. So that means please purchase some books and print media in the second language, even if they're simple little books, and make sure that you make it a point to interact with the child, sitting down with those books and showing them the pictures, saying out a couple of words. And that live interaction really does have a great value in enhancing metalinguistic awareness among kids. And the last point, which I've kind of emphasized all through, is don't worry, be happy, be perfect. So read to your children in the second language. That's been recommended by experts. The fact there is that children respond to language that's tailored to their little needs. So you can talk in short sentences, you can talk in incomplete sentences. The grammar need not be perfect. You need not be perfect. Your pronunciation need not be perfect. But the only thing that needs to happen is an interaction between some adult speaker of the language and the child. And of course, in the early years, the best place to do that is the home, and the best people to do that are parents. So that's really the key to helping your child gain a good command of the second language, even if the parents themselves have only minimal skills in that. Now, as we go on, I think it's important to burst the third myth that is often there at the back of folks' minds, and we've heard a lot about it in our interaction with parents and in the literature that we've been reading, and that's the following: that mixing languages is a sign of confusion, and languages must stay separate. So there's a lot of rules in many houses where there's one parent, one language, where the parents happen to speak different languages, or there's one language at one time and one language at the other time, and then people get very disturbed if they find their child kind of mixing languages. But really, it turns out that that's actually a very normal phase of bilingual language development. Decades of careful research has shown that children distinguish pretty early on between their two languages. And all children move beyond this mixing phase eventually. Plus, what parents need to focus on is the quality and quantity of inputs that the children are receiving in each language, and not worry so much about whether there's a strict separation or not, and certainly not be too much perturbed if in the course of the same conversation you find your children using a bit of one language and a bit of the other one in the early phases of development, eventually you know for a fact, based on all of the research done with so many other multilingual learners, that they're going to get over that. So let's come back now to the question of asking, well, what kind of a program should we use to teach our children a new language? And here's the answer. We really want a program that encourages loving interaction. And the reason is that the environment has a tremendous impact on how our brain cells get wired. And recall that we were talking about children below the age of 10, where, as we said, the brain is racing to make all these neural connections between the neurons. And it's those neural connections, when programmed by learning a new language, that solidify, and that's what helps children to be very, very good at doing that. We know now that those brain cells and the wiring of those cells happens best in a loving environment. So it's very crucial for parents or teachers or caregivers to teach that language in a very loving, caring manner. They should not be pushing the child to learn the new language, but at the same time, whatever they do, it should be done in a fun and loving way, and that's going to have the biggest impact. It turns out that that's the exact philosophy behind the Genie for Tots programs. We very much understand the importance of having fun while learning, and we are big on that. And we've incorporated multiple multimedia components in our program, such as audios and videos and interactive graphics. And we've kind of built these activities around certain core activities in such a way that both children and parents can have a lot of fun while doing this. So let me give you an example. A very famous Wow song, if you go to YouTube, you'll find it's gotten something like 80,000 plus views at this point, is based on a very well-known Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So when you and your child are singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and then you're singing the little ditty that helps you become familiar with, for in our case, the Hindi alphabet, you are in a very relaxed, loving environment, and you're really singing a ditty which is very well known to the child, and what ends up happening is that you learn very naturally and effortlessly. And that's precisely what you want in any program. The other thing that you really want is that the key element for a program is that it must combine or blend different learning styles. And the reason for that is because research has shown that when we see something, we retain only about 20% of it. I'm sorry, when we hear something, we retain about 20% of it. But when we see it, we retain as much as 30% of it. But if you're able to both see and hear it, we retain about 50% of it. And if there's a see, hear, and feel component to our learning, then our retention is much higher, maybe as high as 80% or more. So in reality, all of us learn by a combination of seeing, hearing, and touching, and the degree to which we use these stimuli varies from person to person. So the characteristic of a good program is that it should allow for these different stimuli in the learning process, and moreover, it should allow you to modulate how much of each component you use for a specific child, because each child's requirements are different. And that is a very key reason that in our Genie for Tots program, we have a combination of audios, videos, and print media, as well as very famous talking boards where children can hover their mouse over a letter or a word or an image and then quickly hear the associated sound, and then they can do that as many times as they need to. And parents can do that in a fun way with kids. Because it's see, hear, and touch all put together, it's boosting retention to very high levels, as much as 80%, which is far superior to what you would have if you were just hearing the teacher say something and then going off and trying to repeat it by yourself. So you must blend learning styles. And another observation is that in many cases, when we have phonetic languages, we tend to write them out in the English alphabet, thereby anglicizing it. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is that practice actually disrupts pronunciation and destroys fluency for these phonetic languages. And it creates a lot of confusion for the learner. And the reason is simple. When you write it out in the English alphabet, the two problems happen. One is a child that's also learning the English language and is learning the English phonetics behind it. They try to pronounce the English alphabet using the English phonics, and in some cases there are sounds in a foreign language that simply are not replicable in English. The other problem is when you try to apply English phonics in saying these sounds out aloud, you are never going to reach a native speaker like pronunciation or a native speaker like fluency. So it's very useful to have a program that doesn't have this feature, and that's one of the things that we have in our immersion program, where We use our talking boards. We don't use Anglicization, and that really helps retention. And finally, any program that you look at should emphasize the three keys to mastery, and those are consistency, reinforcement, and continuity. Because a lot of research shows, and we intuitively know that ourselves, that working in little small chunks, a little bit every day, is what leads to sustained progress. So it doesn't matter if you attend one class for 2 hours a week and then you do nothing for the rest of the week. You're a lot better off if you're doing a few minutes of practice each day and building up your capability than piling it all on to the end of the week or whenever and then trying to grade. I mean, we all know you cannot train for a marathon just on a few weekends. You got to start several months in advance. And that's precisely the philosophy behind the online Hindi Immersion program from Genie for Tots, where we emphasize working between parents and kids for no more than 13 to 15 minutes a day. And what we do furthermore is we provide a structure for how those 13 minutes should be divvied up so parents are not lost. They don't have to think about, oh, what am I going to do today? Because the program already is going to lay it out for you. You're going to find the elements online in your account. You're going to be able to use them. We've done that with a lot of thought because the 13 minutes, by the way, is just long enough to make progress while being short enough to fit into the busiest schedules. And that's the philosophy that we came up with. So the next question, of course, is, all right, you've convinced me about the values of second language learning. I can see that bilingualism has tremendous benefits. And the million-dollar question is, which language should we focus on? And we have a real choice here: French, Chinese, Hindi, Spanish, you name it. It turns out that the ideal language to focus on is the one for which you have the best resources available at your disposal and the best support in your community. And I'd like to give you an example here. So there's an example I was reading in the book where there was a father, his daughter was growing up with him in Brooklyn, New York, and he was fascinated by French. He had lived and worked in France as a young man and had become proficient in the language, and he really wanted his daughter to learn French. But when he began investigating the options he had out at Brooklyn, he really discovered that he was in a neighborhood which was dominated by Russian. So there were Russian preschools, there were Russian middle schools, there were Russian immersion programs, there were Russian families whose teenage daughters were only too keen to give babysitting, to do babysitting and help you learn the language by talking in Russian. And so it became pretty evident to him that that's the language he wants to go with. And he didn't really care what particular language his daughter learned, as long as she learned a second language, because he was aware of all the different benefits that would accrue the moment she knew the second language. And the important thing here is, as soon as you come to know two languages, learning the third or the fourth becomes progressively easier. So the important thing is, if you can start the process early, if you can sock in the second language learning early on in life, then you're laying the foundation not only for all the success in the areas we spoke about earlier, but you're also laying a very strong foundation for the child to be able to learn multiple languages pretty much at will later on in life. And I think that's something that is key to observe and recognize, because that's a benefit one might overlook in one's enthusiasm to ensure that your child always learns the language you might think is the best or you might have a soft corner for. But a much better option is to go for a language for which you have the best resources locally available to you, or the best resources online, and that you believe you can sustain easily. Let me come now to myth number 4, which is two languages are the very most to which a very young child should be exposed. I think the best evidence of this myth being a total dud is the fact that we have evidence from successful and healthy human data that's walking around in the world. I mean, we have millions of children that are growing up learning 3 or more languages, and they've been doing so for literally hundreds of years with no real side effects. I mean, if you look around the many parts of the world, think about Singapore or Switzerland or India, it's really not uncommon for a child to learn one language at home, another for the community, and a third one, completely different one, in school. The reason that is not a problem is what I told you earlier. The secret lies in the way a child's brain is developing. And at birth, we have about 100 billion neurons. And by the age of 3 years old, these neurons have been connected and have built up about 1,000 trillion connections. The brain is very, very rich. That's more connections than we would ever need. If you can utilize these connections and activate them, and what really activates them are creative exercises, of which language learning is a very important one. So as long as you activate them and you solidify them, you've made a connection for life and you've made it something that you're going to have. And the brain is not going to start pruning those excess connections because you would have used them after the age of 12. So that's the important point here. What the child needs is very rich quality and intensive quantity of language. Parents therefore need a large bag of tips and tricks to make sure that when they do the second language, they can make it fun and active and interactive. And it turns out that's exactly the kind of emphasis we have in the Genie for Tots systems and programs, where our entire focus is to help parents and kids spend quality time together and be engaged in fun activities that have a very strong educational role. Now you might ask, okay, this sounds great, but do you have any program that we could use right away? And the answer is yes, we absolutely do. And what I'd like to talk about now is the unique Hindi Immersion online program for kids that's available from Genie for Tots. And what makes this program unique are three aspects. One, that we focus on strengthening the bonding between parents and kids. And by now you realize the importance of that. As we've said multiple times, the quality of interactions, the strength of those interactions in the early years, that makes a big difference in second language capability. And therefore, all of our programs are designed first and foremost to create a structure and create content which is focused on strengthening that bonding between parents and kids so that language learning can occur in a very free, very healthy, very sort of unconstrained and a happy environment. And the second thing is, of course, that we are focusing on developing a love of learning via languages. What this does is it actually develops a love of lifelong learning in children. At the same time, it makes that learning fun and easy to use using our rich multimedia tools such as interactive graphics, our audios, videos, and talking boards. As I'll show you later, using the Genie for Tots system, you can accomplish all the goals that we set out in the initial part of this webinar and accomplish the goal of strengthening those 13 areas of development by investing consistently no more than 13 minutes a day. The Genie for Tots program, as you might expect, blends all the three learning styles that we emphasized earlier, namely the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning styles. And we have components that are divided between these in such a way that it gives the parents complete flexibility and freedom to focus on the style that best suits their child. And therefore, you give your little learner a lot of flexibility and you enable them by doing that to learn faster and assimilate faster and retain a lot more because they're using the style that best works with their personality and their way of learning. We are based on a foundation for fluent conversation, so we do not really anglicize, which the common practice of doing that, as I told you earlier, tends to disrupt pronunciation and destroy fluency. So that's something that we don't focus on. What we focus on instead are our talking boards, which remove this difficulty by allowing you to hover your mouse on an image or a word or a letter and simply hear the sound spoken without the need to anglicize it. And that has a tremendous benefit because then you can learn very early on like a native speaker and you have excellent pronunciation, which of course leads to a fluent conversation. And that's our solution. The tools that we use provide a very enriched learning experience for learners of different types by addressing the needs of learners with different types and by focusing on fluency. So we have videos for visual learners, we have audios for auditory learners, and we have the talking boards that I spoke about earlier that combine both touch and sound to give you something that the kinesthetic learners can really play around with. And their talking boards are also a great tool for laying the foundations for correct pronunciation, as we've seen earlier, and they eliminate the need for Anglicisation or writing out the Hindi language in any script other than the Hindi script. So the talking boards are then combined with our live online sessions, which are fun and interactive, and really they're a component that we have not found to be existing in any other program at all, which is offering similar capabilities. And that provides the opportunity to interact with Raki, my wife, and with other participants and get the entire experience Now, by you're of course wondering what are the contents that we focus on, and it turns out that we have a rich variety of engaging content that tickles the little brains. We have poems to get people into the rhythm. We have stories to immerse them into the culture and into the language. We have alphabets, the vowels and the consonants, so you have the fundamental building blocks. You learn the names of things like plants or flowers or animals, so you become more familiar with the terminology of the language. Then there are worksheets to help people practice and kind of immerse themselves in the letters or words that they are learning, and evaluations to make sure that parents and kids and of course the Genie for Tots team can follow how your kids are making progress and keep track of that. And then there is a small element of conversation because that's so valuable in any kind of situation in society that it's nice, even if very early on and even if in a very elementary way, to introduce conversations for kids. Then there's a component of mantras and culture because, as you well know, in a globally dispersed society, the ability to learn a language and appreciate a culture is just so valuable, not necessarily for the specific culture that you appreciate, but just because you have a realization that there are different languages, there are different cultures, there's different people out there, and that there is a way you can learn to appreciate them, to appreciate the diversity and rejoice in the commonality, if you will. Do we achieve all of this in just 13 minutes a day? And the answer is an affirmative yes, because the way we've designed our system is designed to be short enough to allow you to make progress and fit in a busy schedule, yet long enough that you could still make progress. And what it really is a done for you learning system that is provided to parents. And as after the online session is up, you have a 13-minute guided program that tells you how to utilize your 13 minutes and use all of the rich multimedia components of that program in just 13 minutes a day. And what this allows you and your child to do is to work independently at any time that works for you and keep making progress using the 13 minutes a day system. What's so unique about 13 minutes? And the real secret is consistency, reinforcement, and continuity. And these, when taken together, provide for massive progress and at the same time allow you to have a lot of fun with your kids. And that's the philosophy behind the 13-minute segment that we've created for each day of activity, because that's what finally leads to sustained progress. It doesn't matter if you do a couple of hours once a week or once every other week. What really matters is short little segments done with regularity, a little bit every day, because that kind of builds up 13 minutes a day, 13 minutes a day, and gets you to a point where ultimately at the end of some length of time, you can actually see the massive progress that your children will end up making. So if you want to register for the program, I think the best place to go to is our website, www.geniefortots.com. And when you go there, you'll find out that there's always a registration form and you can maybe choose a package and make a payment. But a good thing that you want to be open for is that our website always has some interesting offers, rapid action incentives for people who take action very quickly, and some nice little surprises that you obviously want to check out when you go and look at the registration form and the information for the program. And of course, we have to maintain sort of interactivity in the program, we have a limited number of seats each time, so you would want to grab your spot before they all disappear. And so we are looking forward to seeing you in the program. Thank you so much for your time and for having an opportunity for us to share our research and our learning with you. We do hope that you've learned something very interesting in this webinar and that you've come to realize how valuable just that one single skill, namely that of knowing a second language, can be to propel your children into massive progress in 13 key areas of development that impact everything from academic success to social success to success in later life, and give them lifelong skills like listening skills and advanced comprehension and logical skills and so forth. That is something that's just absolutely an invaluable gift that you can give your children. So we do hope that you're going to take this really hard to heart and you will explore seriously the opportunity to give your child the learning in whatever language you choose. And should you want to explore things with Genie for Tots, then of course you're welcome to visit our website, check out the interesting offers there, and come join our program. And thank you so much for listening, and we definitely look forward to seeing you and interacting with you again.